Hey everybody, it's Dr. Eric Bolkavich. We're back for another edition of Thyroid Thursday. And today I'm going to discuss some of the kind of thoughts and concepts that are being kind of posted about in the functional medicine space about thyroid antibodies. So, the question becomes, are thyroid antibodies the problem? There are a lot of healthcare practitioners in the functional medicine space that say, hey, everybody should have their thyroid antibodies done. Its thyroid antibodies are actually, like little Pac-Man chomping away at the thyroid gland. They get frustrated when medical physicians aren't running thyroid antibodies, and their focus becomes suppressing antibodies. That's why people need to take high-dose vitamin D, and they need to take things, LDN, and other things that are going to suppress the immune system. So let me go through some of the points, give you some of my thoughts on it, and then let you make the decision that you think is best for you. So some of the general, I'd say expert opinions that are out there are that thyroid antibodies are often the earliest indicator that there is a thyroid condition going on. And I would say they could be an indicator of a thyroid gland problem even when you still have a TSH that's within the reference range. But there are typically other indications that there's problems with thyroid physiologies or alterations in thyroid physiology even before thyroid antibodies show up. So when we think about what's driving a thyroid condition, there's different opinions on here. And my opinion and the hypothesis I talk about in the book I wrote with Dr. Kelly Halderman, The Thyroid Debacle, is that the immune system is not out of control in most cases. This is not a significant disorder that needs to be necessarily managed. But what's going on is that cells and physiology are sensing danger, and part of the cell danger model or hypothesis is cell protection. So we slow down manufacturing, ramp up cell defense. And whether it's a cell, a tissue, or the body in general, that's kind of the adaptive response. And so when there is thyroiditis, some people believe that the immune system has just lost control, it's lost tolerance for the thyroid tissue and goes and destroys it. I think it's really a different model. I think what's going on is oftentimes that the body is trying to downregulate metabolism, and it is the immune system that's actively damaging the gland, not by accident, not because it's out of control, but because of an adaptive response to slow down the metabolism. Now, could I be right? Could I be wrong? I don't know. Based on the scientific literature that I've read and a couple decades of experience, it seems to me that that's the more likely answer than you woke up one day and your immune system just lost tolerance for its own tissue, just went out of control. And so what are thyroid antibodies the earliest indicator of a problem? And the answer for that is probably no. And one of the reasons for that is that the literature clearly states that many times thyroiditis starts off as a Th1 driven disorder. And when you have the T cell system that's driving this process, there may not be many antibodies, if any antibodies, early on as the lymphocytes, T lymphocytes, are creating some of the damage to the gland. Okay, so you could have thyroiditis, inflammation of the thyroid gland, occurring for a long period of time without any antibodies at all. Okay, so they may not be an early indicator of a problem. Could they be? Absolutely, they could be. What might be better indicators of a thyroid condition or a thyroid problem? How about starting to have signs and symptoms that, may be small in the beginning, but that may be an indicator. How about if we run a full thyroid panel, not just a TSH, a free T4, and some antibodies, but we actually run a comprehensive thyroid panel and we look for some indications of underconversion or overconversion of thyroid hormone, indicating that cells may be truly hypothyroid, or that they are, even though it looks like we have this thyroiditis going on, cells don't want to convert T4 to T3, okay? We could also run a full thyroid panel and do that in conjunction with the rest of a comprehensive metabolic panel and look for patterns of hypothyroidism. Do we see glucose or insulin resistance? Do we see fatty liver issues? Do we see elevated cholesterol? Do we see reduced renal function? Do we see other lab indicators? And I've talked about these in the book. I talked about them on other posts on Thyroid Thursdays about the patterns of hypothyroidism in different tissues. Here's another expert opinion. Antibody testing is important because it differentiates whether you have just regular thyroiditis from Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And I don't think it really matters. I think when there's thyroiditis, it's thyroiditis, whether if you're Th1 dominant, you're probably not going to have much in the way of antibodies. If you're Th2 dominant, you're probably going to have higher antibody production. So the literature pretty much shows that a lot of times that thyroiditis starts out as Th1 and then in time can switch to a Th2 driven disorder. So does it really make a difference whether we throw the name Hashimoto's on there? No, it doesn't really matter at all. It shouldn't change the strategy at all. It's still thyroiditis. It's still the immune system driving damage to the gland. What we should be doing is then saying, why is the immune system being directed to damage the gland? And that's where most of the experts, I think, will start to say you have to deal with the triggers. And if what's driving the immune system are a bunch of triggers, then that's where you have to ask the question, is the immune system doing the wrong thing? Because if I remove the triggers and the thyroiditis goes down, then the immune system wasn't out of control. The immune system wasn't dysregulated. The immune system was doing what it's innately supposed to do in an adaptive situation. And when you remove the things that were creating the danger response, these triggers, the immune system can calm down. Okay? So is it important for the differentiation? No. If you've got thyroiditis, if you've got primary hypothyroidism, even though they talk about iodine deficiency being the major cause, I think in most developed countries, it's more likely it's an immune-driven disorder than it's an iodine issue. The third point is thyroid antibodies cause most of the damage to the gland. And this has pretty much been discussed in the literature pretty clearly, even though people in our space keep talking about the antibodies being like little Pac-Man eating away your thyroid gland, and therefore you need to suppress antibodies. You need to take high-dose vitamin D and other things to suppress the immune system so it doesn't damage the gland. Listen, whether you take LDN, whether you take high-dose vitamin D, suppressing the immune system or suppressing antibodies does not necessarily address the issue. Just because you have less antibodies doesn't mean you don't have thyroiditis going on. The literature clearly shows that most of the damage is not being done by the antibodies. Most of it's being done by the infiltrating lymphocytes, not the antibodies. So suppressing antibodies doesn't necessarily stop thyroiditis. So spend less time trying to focus on suppressing antibodies and more time thinking about what might be underlying or causing the problem. Number 4, opinion by experts is that suppressing antibodies with meds or subs is the solution. I kind of just discussed that with the last topic. So these two things go together. Antibodies are causing most of the damage, therefore you need to suppress, and that is not the case. I see a lot of people taking high-dose LDN, high-dose vitamin D. They still have chronic thyroiditis and poor conversion going on, so they're not really addressing the issues. So here's some things to consider. Your signs and symptoms may be the earliest indicator. So if you start to put on weight, you start to be more tired, more fatigued, blood sugar regulation problems, it's probably important to run a more comprehensive metabolic panel, okay? 2, when you run a thyroid panel, get more than TSH and free T4 and thyroid antibodies. Get the full panel. All those tests mean something to somebody, but don't be surprised if you ask a non-functional practitioner and they only want to do TSH and free T4. That's what they've been taught. But if you're seeing a functional medicine practitioner, you want total values, you want free values, you want T3 uptake, you want thyroid antibodies, you want reverse T3. All tests provide some valuable information. 3, it's my opinion that you should always look at a thyroid panel in context of a full comprehensive metabolic panel to look for tissues of hypothyroid, tissue indicators of hypothyroidism, because those things may occur much earlier than thyroid antibodies, much earlier than signs and symptoms. So get that done. And then 4, start evaluating your diet and lifestyle, because though your diet and your lifestyle are the things that are driving the stressors that are causing the thyroiditis to begin with. Okay, if you have any questions, put them below the video.